Hey, I'm Matt at Mr. Maple, and thanks for clicking on another Mr. Maple video.
And I'm Tim at Mr. Maple. We greatly appreciate you watching this video. This is one of our series where we answer a lot of the questions we're getting in our emails to really help people out so they understand how to take care of their Japanese maples, how to grow them, and really gardening 101 for Japanese maples.
Hey, today's topic is when should I water my Japanese maple? Now we're actually here in January of 2022, and we're going to be discussing a little bit about the proper watering times for Japanese maples.
Japanese maples are very unique in the fact that they really want to get dried out. They really don't want to get too much water at one period of time, and if they do get water saturated, they want to just get saturated, soaked, and then dry completely out before they get watered again. Often, if we overwater a Japanese maple and leave that water on them too much, they'll start to get Phytophthora root rot, which isn't very good for them, and actually can be very detrimental to the tree long term. So it's really important that we get those drying out periods throughout the season.
Yeah, too boggy and too wet feet, especially in those winter months, is one of the quickest ways to set a Japanese maple up for an unsuccessful tree. Good drainage is the #1 priority when growing any Japanese maple. So that should be forefront in any Japanese maple container or garden setting. Is how is the drainage? Is it going to be holding water? Is it going to be boggy or wet feet? So you have to get good drainage. That's the very first thing before worrying about any other watering. You've heard us say in some of our other videos, but make sure not to have the disc that holds water, that little saucer that goes underneath the pot that holds water. You know, Jody and I, we get more questions when we see those photos go up in the email and they say, I don't know what's going wrong with my Japanese maple, and they have that little saucer below the pot and it's holding water. Well, that's stopping that drainage. Even if it doesn't look like it, that water is going to stay higher in the pot if the water's here. It's a simple gravity thing. So you want to make sure it doesn't have that saucer below it. You want to make sure you even have like pot feet on container Japanese maples, especially in the winter months, because it's going to increase that drainage and it's going to improve the overall health of the plant.
One thing to remember when growing a Japanese maple in container is that it does require water. So if you have this in a winter space where it's not getting natural water, you will have to be the person that brings water to that plant. It can't get water by itself. And that you have to make sure that this plant gets wet and then dries out before it gets wet again. And so this becomes a little more tricky. And so we often recommend putting that plant in the ground somewhere outside naturally so it gets watered by itself with the rain or the moisture from the snow, things that occur naturally versus you having to go and water it every single time. It does become a little more tricky, and the best thing you can do is the finger test. People joke about it with it's what you do with babies, but it's what you do with container plants as well. You make sure that it dries out first, and then you water it again once it gets wet again, once it gets dry again. And when you do that, the plant's going to thrive and do much better for you than when it's going to get soaked, saturated, and then catch that Phytophthora root rot, and then be very detrimental to the plant overall.
Yeah, Japanese maples, you may have heard us say this in many of our videos, but we list Japanese maples as working good zones 5 through 9. Now, zones can vary a little bit. Zones only rate how cold it gets, so there's no exact heat recommendation there. That's a generalization, and it works really good for the East Coast. So zone 9 may not be the max, but zone 9 Florida would definitely probably be one of the hotter areas you can grow a Japanese maple. Zone 9 California could be only getting in the 80s but not getting below the 40s, so it may be a little interesting there, the zones. So water can vary per zone, and this is a little bit about winter watering. Now getting into summer, the best time to water your Japanese maples are when they need water. So you want to make sure that they're not staying too dry or too wet. The key there is that the roots are getting saturated and then drying out completely. You don't want a Japanese maple to be constantly soggy. I hear people sometimes say, well, you have to maintain that they're always moist. When the roots are actually drying out, they're expanding. You're expanding that Japanese maple root ball. You'll have healthier roots if the tree is not staying constantly damp.
Now, with the Japanese maples, it's real important that you've got that good drainage that Matt's talking about, but you also have to remember when you're growing a Japanese maple in full sun, it's going to require more water and care, especially in a container,
for sure,
than one growing in one in the shade. And what that means is you'll have to go out and check and see, is that plant drying out? Do I need to add more water to it? Do I need to put a watering system on this based on my soil conditions? Every soil condition is different as well. And so if you've got a soil that holds more water, you're obviously going to need to water less. If you've got one that drains very quickly, you're going to have to water a lot more frequently than other people. And so watering very much depends on the soil conditions and the sunlight that you're putting the plants in. And what you're going to have to do is go out there, put your finger in the pot, do the finger test, and check, or the finger in the ground and test Does this need more water? Is this dried out right now? Is this wet right now? What can I do to make sure this plant isn't staying too wet? That's always the key, is making sure that you're not watering or overwatering the plant. Underwatering, you often notice it real quickly, and you can make up for that. But overwatering is what's really detrimental to a Japanese maple.
Yeah, they're basically two different ways to grow maples. I mean, you know, a lot of people, Japanese maples work great in a container, but you just have to be conscious that it has a little bit of different set of rules. So if you have a containerized Japanese maple and you have that in a good bit of sun, it's definitely going to dry out quicker, as Tim was saying. But what may surprise you is that it may do good for several seasons while that root ball hasn't taken up the full container. But what'll surprise someone is then they'll be watering it the same amount. They'll be like, hey, get some natural water, and it gets watered, you know, quite frequently. I check it. But then what may happen is that root ball may have taken up most of your soil there in your container. And then you're going to get surprised one July when we have a heat spike, and all of a sudden your tree gets a little more defoliated or just burnt foliage look. And it may be that your tree has used up all of the soil there in the container, and now it's drying out much quicker than it did previously. So those things can change over time as well, and it's something to definitely be conscious of in the container. You know, it's easier to grow in the ground, but containers are a great way to grow them. You just have to be a little bit more conscious of the rules.
In a container, in our cold frame settings, we're watering maybe once every 2 to 3 weeks. Outside, you're not going to have that same humidity often, and you may have to water a little more frequently. If you bring it inside in an unheated garage or something like that, you're going to have to water way more frequently because the humidity is not there, and you're sucking the moisture out of the plant because of the low humidity in the garage or the unheated space. And so that's something to always keep in mind with that, is making sure that you do get some water, because you can dry freeze a plant if it doesn't get any water during those winter months.
So definitely check out our video on should I bring my Japanese maple indoors, because that's a determining factor in when you should water as well. And the quick answer is no, you shouldn't bring it indoors unless you're in zone 5. So in zone 5, if you're wintering those trees, you only want to water in times when you're above freezing. So after a cold freeze, plants love to get watered. Like we're here in zone 6B in western North Carolina, and after some of our deeper freezes, we can get down to -10 here. After some of our deeper freezes, when it warms back up above freezing, one of the first things we do is we water our greenhouses. And that gives those plants a little bit of recovery. You know, water really is life for plants. So remember that after your freezes, that's a great time to water. You're going to bring as much energy and recovery back to those plants as you can. Now, inside, you're going to want to water at least 2 to 3 times a month. That's kind of key there if it's in an area that doesn't get any natural water. So always be conscious of your natural water amount. It seems too simple, but definitely touch the soil. That's the best way you're going to be able to determine, is this tree damp? If so, maybe hold off. Is this tree too dry? Is the soil already kind of getting to that point where it needs more water? That's when you're going to want to increase the water amount. And that's the simple thing that's going to apply spring, summer, fall, every single season, because that tree doesn't want to be standing in water.
We've had people before say, I've used the soil humidity meter and it has this much moisture in the pot. That's getting too complicated. Use your finger.
Yeah.
It's very simple. You can't use your finger wrong in testing to see if it's moist or not. And when you do that, it'll really help you determine whether or not you need to water. Japanese maples, like Matt was saying, they dry out after a cold spell, after a deep freeze, just like they do during the super heat spikes of the summer. And watering after freeze are crucial. One thing you'll need to know too with watering Japanese maples is that as it starts to leaf out more, it's going to need more water. As the summer progresses and it's getting ready for that new flush of growth again, it's going to need more water again. And so you'll have to adjust how much you water based during the different times of the season. Going into the fall, the plant's going to need the least amount of water before the winter, and then during the winter it's going to need the least amount of water overall.
Yeah, the best fall color occurs when the nights get a little cooler and the water amount decreases and you start to increase that fall color. So constantly overwatering a tree can change the fall color a little bit. Be conscious of your zone too. Certainly some of these rules will be different for Dallas than will be for, say, Seattle, because the rainfall is going to be so much significantly different in each of those places. So be conscious of how much natural water you're getting. Keep track of these things, and we hope some of these generalizations will give you a better understanding of how to water your Japanese maple, and we hope this is helpful for you, especially the newer gardeners, on how to have a successful, happy Japanese maple.
Watering is crucial to Japanese maples. We really hope that you've enjoyed this little quick tidbit on tips for growing Japanese maples and how much you should water your Japanese maple. We get questions about this all the time, so we're trying to answer as much of that. If you have any suggestions for people, please put that in the comments. Or if you have any experiences with watering or watering catastrophes that you could tell people in the comments, definitely do that. I definitely think that helps people realize that this is an important thing when it comes to growing a Japanese maple.
Plants can get too much water. You know, I have people say, I don't know what's wrong with it. It gets a water hose for 2 hours every day. And I'm like, I don't think you can drink out of a water hose for 2 hours every day. I know what's wrong with it. So just be conscious these are living plants, and a healthy balance is really what we're going for there. Please take a second, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If this video has been beneficial to you, please share it with your gardening friends.
We greatly appreciate you watching this video. Like Matt said, please like it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch our assortment of videos. We're putting out more and more content on specific Japanese maple cultivars, but also on how to take care of the Japanese maples that you have. So I hope this channel was really helpful to you. And if you find it helpful, please shop on MrMaple.com. That's how you support us as we're helping support and grow your Japanese maples in a beautiful fashion. Thanks.
God bless.
And have a great day.
All you have to do to get involved in the giveaway is like, subscribe, and share our video. Then under every single video you want, you can go and comment, I dig Mr. Maple. And every single time you comment, you'll be entered to win a Mr. Maple hat. So we're going to be doing a giveaway for one of these hats. We're coming up on 8,000 subscribers. Get involved.